It's time to get lost. Lost in the woods. If it happened to you, would you stay put and wait for someone to find you? Or would you panic and keep going, possibly making yourself more lost? No matter which you choose, getting lost in the wilderness is something you want to avoid, if only for the fact that some very unnatural, rather supernatural things can happen in the woods. Enjoy these allegedly true, scary lost in the woods stories. If you want your experience to possibly be featured in a future video, you can share it with us at darknessprevails.org. The Wendigo of Algonquin Park, from Queen Bee. Location: Ontario, Canada. This is a story from my Popa. A couple of years ago, he and I were talking about going hiking in Algonquin Provincial Park, somewhere that he had been multiple times and had grown up near. Unfortunately, his health was failing and our trip was cancelled. He told me that it was likely for the best, since he wouldn't be able to protect me from the Wendigo if he saw it. My Popa is half First Nations, with his mother being Cree and Huron, and his father being Scottish. Because his mother was removed from her home as a child and placed into the schools, she lost her status as First Nations and wasn't allowed to live on the res, but she lived just outside of it, near Algonquin Provincial Park. Popa has many friends who lived on the res and would often go with him into the park to hike and hunt when he was a young man. They saw many strange things in the deepest parts of the forest. However, this is the story he shared with me that day. Popa was hiking with a friend named Ben when they were in their late 20s. They had already been out in the park for several days, camping at nightfall and continuing in the morning. They were rather deep in the woods. It was late October and getting colder as the days went on, but they were prepared for that and often camped in the middle of winter. One night, as the temperature dropped below freezing, they decided it was time to set up camp and start a fire. They were starting to gather wood when Popa heard something. It was the crying of a baby or child. Popa had grown up during the Great Depression and had heard stories of people abandoning unwanted babies and children in the forest. He started to follow the crying when Ben grabbed his arm. "Don't go over there, John. It's not what you think it is," Ben said, looking a little pale. "We should move our camp, or that thing will just keep wailing and getting closer." Popa was confused, not understanding what his friend meant. But what if that's someone in need? A kid or another camper who got lost? He broke free from his friend's hand. "I can't leave until I check it out." Ben sighed, but relented. He loaded his hunting rifle and told Popa to do the same before they went to check. The forest was in twilight now as they moved towards the crying. As they broke through a thick patch of trees, they came to an old campsite. There, lying on the ground, was a child that looked to be no older than a year. Popa started walking towards it, but Ben stopped him, telling him to wait. As Popa looked back, the child began to change. It stood up, the legs under it growing long and bent as if it had two sets of knees, each bending in a different direction. Its arms were much the same, with 2 elbows per arm, one bending forward, the other back. Its torso grew the size of a large man. Its ribs were protruding as if threatening to tear through the skin, and its head grew to the size of a man's, but with a mouth so large it took up most of its face. When its jaw unhinged, it began to cry again, as if it was trying to draw them closer to it. Ben began to chant, and the beast screamed as if in pain before running off, knowing that this was not going to be the easy meal it wanted. Popa was frozen to the spot. "What was that, Ben?" "That, John, was a Wendigo, the spirit of a person who became lost in the woods and starved. It is said that the spirit over time becomes twisted and evil. You must never approach one without protecting yourself first. Now let's go move the camp. This is its hunting grounds, and it will be back. Popa is in his late 80s now, and every time he tells this story, he still looks terrified. He's now palliative, meaning his days are numbered, and he asked me to take his ashes to Algonquin Park as he did with Bin's, and scatter them through the woods. But he reminded me never to go alone, lest I come face to face with the Wendigo. Lost in the Forest with My Cousin Barry. From Turbo Timothy 1336. Location: unknown. I went through a phase when I was 9 where I was really fascinated with my uncle. He owned an ATV rental place. When the opportunity presented itself for me to get closer to my uncle, I took it. I had never gone camping before, but Uncle Greg and Cousin Barry spend a lot of time in the woods, since they're squatch hunters, so I felt safe going out there with them. But this isn't a Sasquatch story. The camping trip started out really fun. Uncle Greg had brought some beer, and I got to taste a sip of his can and really liked it. Me and Cousin Barry, who was the same age as me, played in the leaves together, throwing stones at trees, taking off our shirts and comparing muscles like teenage boys would do. Time passed by quickly, and before we knew it, it was nightfall. We set up our tents, me and Barry sharing one, while Uncle Greg slept alone in the biggest tent. In the middle of the night, we were awakened by the sound of rustling leaves. Frightened, I huddled up closer to Barry and burrowed my face into his chest. The tent's zipper began to open. I could feel myself trembling in terror. A head emerged, and I saw that it was Uncle Greg. Apparently, he had forgotten that he had a client early in the morning and that he needed to get back to town immediately to prep. But I wasn't ready to go yet. While this trip was originally just a ploy for me to get closer to Uncle Greg, I was enjoying my time with Barry. We begged and pleaded with him so he could stay behind, telling him he could just pick us up tomorrow if we stayed put. He happily agreed. Family means a lot to Uncle Greg, so he was excited to see his nephew and his son finally becoming friends. Barry and I had hung out a few times at family reunions before, but for some reason we never quite hit it off. But this camping trip was exactly what we needed. It was fun while it lasted. Uncle Greg soon agreed and left us, but I couldn't hold it anymore. I really had to use the bathroom. Greg had told us that certain dangerous animals are attracted to the pheromones found in urine, so I had to go away from the camp. Barry came with me. Normally, I prefer to be alone, but for some reason, I felt safer when he was around. That's when disaster struck. If you've ever seen the movie The Blair Witch Project, you may remember that the protagonists find these weird stick figures. And that's very similar to what we began to find. At the time, I had not seen that movie, but Barry had, so when he found this odd bundle of purposely put together sticks, he grabbed me by the hand, and we started running. I don't know how long we ran for, but I fell over at one point. My foot had gotten caught under a heavy root. I think I sprained my ankle. I couldn't run anymore, but luckily we could hear cars nearby. We were near a road. We couldn't quite pinpoint the direction it was coming from, but it filled our heavy hearts with hope. Barry took his knife and carved our names in a tree, so we could know if we were walking in circles. He helped me up so we could keep going, because we could not afford to stop. My heart was beating faster than it ever had before. The sounds of cars were getting closer. We could even make out a slight glow of headlights in the distance. I remember feeling relieved when I saw Barry smile, but it wasn't over yet. From behind us, we could hear footsteps, and I swear that I could hear laughing. But another set of sounds came from the opposite of that. The familiar songs of a certain radio was booming towards us from the road. It was Uncle Greg's car. He had apparently changed his mind and picked us up on the side of the road. Were we just kids being scared of the woods and nearly getting ourselves lost? Or did something chase us when we were at our most vulnerable? Forest Encounter from J.M. Location: the border of Ohio and West Virginia. I was lost and I knew it. Lost in the woods at night. I'm in my mid-20s and was 19 at the time of this story. I live on the border of Ohio and West Virginia in a vastly wooded area in the same house I've lived in for as long as I could remember. At the time, I had quite a few young friends that I spent every weekend with. That particular autumn night, we were at my friend Jonah's house, sitting outside in front of his house at a campfire. We were laughing, drinking, just having a good time. No one wanted the night to end, so when the fire began to go out, Jonah stood up and declared that he was going to get more firewood. So he left the group. The night went on, minutes passed, and Jonah did not return. I began to get nervous. He had been gone for 15 minutes, and the pile of firewood was only just behind the house. Maybe he needed some help carrying it, I thought. So I stood and started towards the back of the house. The firewood pile was at the edge of the forest there, and that's where I found Jonah. He was stiff and shaking, pale as a ghost and eyes wide, staring into the forest. I patted him on the shoulder and asked what was wrong. He barely moved, but slowly brought a quivering arm up, and he pointed. I followed his finger and peered into the trees. A pair of huge white and circular eyes peered back. The eyes were only a few feet off the ground, so whatever the creature was, it was either short or crouching. Me and Jonah stood there watching it for a while, too scared to move or even breathe. And then the creature stood. It wore a plaid red shirt and blue jeans. It was at least 9 feet tall and skinny beyond belief. It had no nose or ears or hair, but huge shimmering eyes and a skeletal mouth. Jonah and I bolted. We ran into the forest and soon lost sight of each other. I didn't care. All I knew was that I ran in the opposite direction of the thing. I soon heard footsteps running in the bushes behind me. They were too fast to be Jonah and sounded like they were on all fours. They were closing in. I turned around while still running, but wished I hadn't. I saw its glimmering eyes focusing on me. And then I fell into a hole. I fell about 5 feet and into the dirt. It looked like a trap. I suddenly heard the sound of a ringing bell, like some sort of alarm, followed by voices. There were phrases like, "I think we got it." They were local hunters, apparently. Not taking the chance, though, I began to climb out of the hole as quickly as possible. I couldn't see the hunters, nor the creature from before. As I scanned in every direction, I realized I was utterly and hopelessly lost. I almost gave up, but then decided that if the hunters were out here, then there must be civilization nearby. After an hour of what seemed like endless searching, I found something: an empty cabin. It was unlocked and I let myself inside. I don't remember if I fainted or just collapsed from exhaustion, but I woke up sometime later to the sound of a piercing scream. Not sure what it was, I decided to hide under the bed nearby. Sometime later, I heard someone walking around the cabin, as if they were trying to find a way inside. I had locked the door, thank God. I thought I could wait until morning or until help arrived, but then I remembered the window. It was wide open, and the footsteps were getting closer to that side of the cabin. I had an idea. I crawled out from under the bed and I opened the door. The footsteps stopped for a moment before doubling in speed and coming towards me. I ran to the back of the cabin to where the window was. I jumped out of the window as silently as I could, and I ran back into the forest. I glanced behind me and barely saw the all too tall silhouette of something standing in the window, watching me as I tried to escape. Its head was tilted, and there was fresh red liquid on its mouth. I eventually found my way back to my house, not Jonah's. I traveled 8 miles that night. Me and my remaining friends who I've told this story to refer to the creature as the Bubbajacks. There's no reasoning behind it, besides it sounding creepy. The next time you're out in the woods, be careful, because you could get lost, and you could be stalked by the Bubbajacks. Going camping, from CrimsonWolf. Location, California. It was my first time going camping, and my family was taking us to a forest in Southern California. They thought it was about time for a proper family vacation. We arrived around 3 in the afternoon when the sun was still high. We went for a hike deep in the woods until we found a spot far enough from civilization as there was another nearby campground. We found a good spot when the sun began to set. My uncle sends me with my 6-year-old niece at one point to go find some firewood. We go together. All the while I'm trying to tell my niece as many forest facts as possible, as she always wants to learn something new, and she looked up to me. We take our time and come back about 20 minutes later. It's around 9 p.m. now. Almost all the young ones and parents were asleep, so me, a friend who was our guest, and our cousins as well as my uncle were up. The fire was slowly fading, and I went to go find more firewood. My friend asked if he wanted me to join him. I said no, not to worry about it, that I would be back in no time. But I would soon regret that answer. I walk a few minutes into the woods. I know that I need to hurry as I can hear my uncle and my friend talking, yet I can no longer see the fire. I pick up some kindling and I start to head back, though I'm having trouble finding my way. As I'm beginning to panic, I stop and begin to look around. That's when I hear the sound of a twig snapping. My heart seems to freeze. "Hello?" I call out. When another snap occurs even closer, I panic more, forcing myself to run, but I stop again realizing I have no sense of direction anymore. I've no idea where to go, where the camp is. And now those ominous footsteps are closing in on me. Footsteps that are far too deliberate and heavy. I gather my courage and I shout for my family, not caring if my pursuer hears me. This also confirms that whoever's following me, it's not someone I know because they don't reply to my calls. I stumble around for about 5 more minutes, all the while the footsteps are still coming. I don't see any signs, nothing familiar. I continue walking, hoping for something. That's when I come across a river. It seemed to be heading down. Remembering that we were near a body of water that I believe broke off into a river, I began to run up to it. I'm desperate, once again searching for anything familiar, but failing. I had been focused on setting up the tents after all. A noise behind me catches my attention. I turn to finally see my pursuer. There's a silhouette, tall and skinny, and for a moment I believe that it's my friend, as it somewhat resembles his shape, but this assumption was wrong. I took a step closer to the man, still trying to get a word out of him, but all he did was stay still. It didn't take long for my eyes to adapt to the darkness, and I soon made out details. There was a massive scar over both his eyes. His clothes were torn up and dirty. When I saw that he had something sharp and glinting in his hand, I ran. I go back up the hill, hoping that I'm close to the campsite, close to anyone that could hear me. Eventually, I do find myself in the middle of the trail that showed that the other campsite was close. I ran in that direction, suddenly seeing what appeared to be 2 families, a total of 8 people, looking for me, flashlights lacing the forest. I was found and reunited with my friends and family. I immediately told them the story of the man with the torn clothes and the scarred eyes. I had been lost for over 2 hours, and I was nearly attacked. This event did not stop me from camping in the future, but it did keep me from wandering into the woods where there were no trails or landmarks. A creepy story from Taiwan, from Shan 1996. The torii at Yasukuni Shrine of Tokyo was made from the highest quality of false cypress from Taiwan, but there's a dark history behind it. My great-great-grandpa's family was very poor. When he was 16, he quit school and became a logger to help with his family's financial hardships. It was the 1920s when the Japanese discovered a whole mountain of ancient false cypress in central Taiwan and decided to start harvesting it to build Shinto shrines. The indigenous tribe was very mad about the proposal. They warned that these trees were thousands of years old. They were so old to a point that they had developed consciousness as if they were conscious beings. There were also spirits guarding these ancient trees. Terrible revenge would ensue if these trees were harmed. That's what the Taiwanese said, what they believed. The Japanese officials ignored their protests and called them superstitious. They relocated the entire tribe so they wouldn't intervene in the operation. The operation began 2 days after my great-great-grandpa's 17th birthday. My great-great-granddad and his colleagues spent the entire day cutting only 1/3 of a tree in the first day, largely due to how big and tall these trees were. The first day of the operation was a success. Everyone was drinking happily with one another, and they were making fun of this warning from the indigenous peoples. The loggers camped right beside the logging yard, which is surrounded by these ancient false cypress. My great-great-granddad had a weird dream at the first night camping there. A dream that he was lost in these woods, panicking, trying to find his way out. He woke up in a cold sweat to his colleagues' loud snoring. He shrugged it off, but he kept having the same dream every night. Dreams of being lost with no way out. He was lacking sleep and became so tired in the morning he was not able to do work. So his boss transferred him to an office in Camp Yama at the lower part of the mountain. He would be doing some light labor, like cooking and delivering documents. Days passed with more and more trees being chopped down. Many loggers started developing inexplicable sicknesses, to which the doctors could not explain upon examination. Some of them had long-lasting fever, and some of them couldn't stop coughing. Some loggers even began quitting the job. They reported having nightmares where they were lost in the woods, their names being called by demonic voices at night. One day after lunch break, a logger, covered in red, screamed and ran into the office at Camp Yama. "Help!" he yelled out and collapsed right by the entrance, red gushing from a cut in his chest. It seemed to be from some sort of vicious animal attack. My granddad and some police officers immediately picked up their rifles and rushed to the logging site as fast as possible. What my granddad saw traumatized him for the rest of his life. There were more people, screaming, red all over the ground. It seemed like they had attacked each other. But for what? My granddad thought. They were hysterical, those that were still alive. It was like they were possessed, some of them crawling around and making weird noises like they were animals. A younger logger, possibly around the age of 16, was found trembling in fear in his tent. Upon being questioned, He said that 5 of the loggers had returned from the woods with eyes that seemed full of hate. They didn't act right. They seemed irrationally angry. He said they went insane and began to attack the other loggers, using their hands and axes. He ran hiding into his tent, only occasionally peeking out to the outside. He claimed that it was at that moment when he saw the mist come from the woods and start surrounding the logging site, as if something was unleashing some unknown evil power through it. The entire operation was completely shut down after the incident. My great-great-granddad returned to his hometown and became a barber instead, and the indigenous tribe later learned about the incident and was not surprised. The Japanese later had to request a shaman over to bless the entire logging site, and the paranormal activities were all gone after that. The surviving trees are still there in Nando County. They are now well protected by the National Forest Administration. I think if every tree has consciousness like these, it would definitely make mankind cherish our planet a bit more. Watched. From Libby C. Location, England. I go to a scout group in England. Our group isn't as hardcore as the Americans would be. We're more chilled and laid back. I think it was around October, and around that time it gets dark really late. So we were allowed to play a game called Manhunt, a grown-up version of hide and seek as we called it, the leaders versus the kids. After a few minutes of starting the game, I ended up getting myself lost in the woods. I'm pretty bad with my sense of direction. After a few minutes of wandering around, I heard a twig snap behind me. I assumed it was one of my leaders. I was both relieved to be found and not ready to give up the game yet, so I quickly hid behind a bush with a smile. I lowered my breathing, trying to remain quiet, but when I could no longer hear myself, I could hear just how oddly quiet it was around me. But suddenly something broke the silence. A low, deep, distorted voice whispered into my ear, "Found you." I shuddered, letting out a deep breath that I didn't know I was holding in. I quickly turned, knowing that that was not my leader, but there was no one there. I was so freaked out that I ran back in the direction I thought the troop was, and I luckily managed to find them. I didn't participate in the game after that. Stay calm, stay put, and be as loud as possible. If you find yourself lost in the woods, be smart and don't let yourself be lost for too long, because the longer you're out there, the sooner you'll be found by something you don't want finding you. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget, you can share your stories with us at darknessprevails.org for a chance to have your story in an episode. If you want to support the show, go to patreon.com/darknessprevails or check out our merchandise at teespring.com/stores/darknessprevails, or just click the shop button below if you're watching on YouTube. Now, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video about 10 real alien encounters. Doug Different says, "Yay, now I can finally do my house cleaning. It does get pretty messy after a good probe." Moo says, "Don't mind if I do, I definitely believe. You know, odds are we aren't alone, and I hope I get to see some sort of alien life before I'm gone from this world." Jeff Rainey says, "Heck yeah, some of my favorite types of stories. Be careful, Jeff, or you could be living your own alien encounter soon." Gothic Dragon Warrior Queen, what a name, says, "Science fiction as well as horror. Scary cool. I really wish there were more scary movies on that topic. You can never have enough science fiction horror." And Mimi Codson says, "Tell the aliens they can have my old neighbors. No one wants them back." Well, they probably were aliens. Is that why you were scared of them? Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. But don't you worry, because more scary stories are coming soon. So stay tuned. Until next time, Here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.